Hello.
Hello.
Yes.
Ankita, start yourself.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Myself, Shruti Gupta, and my colleague Ankita will give her introduction. Over to Ankita.
Thank you, Shruti. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Architect Ankita Revankar, Assistant Professor at Rope Institute of Art and Design. As we all know, the institution has been hosting a series of webinars for its students. And today we have with us architect Ujjaval Parekh, co-founder of Reasoning Instincts Architecture Studio, Ahmedabad. So before we start with the session, I would like to give a brief introduction about Ujjaval. He's a graduate from CEPT University, Ahmedabad. His love towards understanding cities, their essence and complexities has motivated him to bag distinction in Masters in Urban Design at National University of Singapore. He has thoroughly enjoyed the experience of being a full-time lecturer at Singapore Polytechnic. He also has numerous exposures in high-rise residential design, workspace design, and urban design in his 14 years of architectural experience in India, Thailand, and Singapore. Welcome to the webinar, Ujjaval. Over to you.
Thank you, Ankita. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Ujjaval Parekh, and I thank Vogue Institute of Arts and Design for inviting and arranging this session. You give me an opportunity to share my thoughts on certain design aspects and everything. Right. So please note that if you have any questions or queries, mention them in the Q&A section so that I can respond to it as and when possible during the course of the discussion. Right. I'm just going to start my slides with you guys. Right. So just give me a minute. So I hope I am audible to everyone, right? And everyone is able to see the slides now, right? Okay, great. So before I just start again, I'll just remind that just to maintain certain easiness and smoothness in the whole webinar, please mention your Q&A, your questions in the Q&A section only. Don't use the chat section for the question and answer aspects, right? So I'll only answer the one that are there in the Q&A section, right? All right, so the topic that I chose to share with you guys is about purpose of details. And whenever I talk about details or I think about details, there's one incident that I always share with everyone that had happened with me during my school days. And this is what you see on the screen right now is my academic work back in 2003 during my working drawing semester, you know, and this was semester 6 for us. And we were quite excited and delighted to know that Professor Doshi was going to take our studio, our working drawing studio. And I consider myself very lucky as well to have been taught by various distinguished teachers at CEPT University, especially B.V. Doshi, right? So there was a layer of this kind of excitement in the whole class where we came to know that Doshi sir is going to come and take our working drawings. And the only condition was that in a period of 16 weeks of semester, he was going to join in at after 6 weeks was over. But that's okay. So till the first 6 weeks, we interacted with other teachers where we learned the importance of working drawings. We learned the technical details that one needs to be mindful of when they design details and everything, the idea of drawing convention and everything. So it was going on, and then 6 weeks, after 6 weeks, when Doshi sir walked in the studio, he saw what we were doing, and he said, "This is good, but you know what, let's do one thing, let's forget all of these things." And he instructed the whole class to draw 20 sketches of details, one A4, one sketch. So basically asking us to draw 20 details that has been never seen before, or something by ourselves that we think is going to enhance our design, the design solution that we were looking for. And it was an interesting exercise, and most of us ended up having details that might not actually work in the real world, and it was quite a bit of overwhelming experience and I personally struggled to comprehend those things, and that is kind of reflected in what you see on the screens by the kind of drawings that I prepared at that time during my academic days in this particular semester. but over the period of years, when we get into practice, you realize the importance and significance of that exercise. What that exercise did basically was to take away the fear of trying something new. Just be fearless about failure in that case. And you don't have to necessarily, when we say try something new, necessarily reinvent the wheel, but be innovative in the way we apply the idea of wheel, right? So this is something that has been a very critical point where I have started looking at things differently. I've started observing things differently, and it helps me to understand detailing in architecture and everything, right? And so there is a idiom that we all are aware of that says that the devil is in the detail. It primarily means that it is talking about the the mysterious elements of a detail, or something like what you see, something which on the first look appears a very simple thing, but it actually has a multiple complex notion to it, right? And one way to understand that is this beautiful self-portrait done by an artist, Mary Ellen. And when you look at this portrait, we do appreciate it. It's beautiful, right? But when we see the details, right, this is made out of plastic bottle caps. And that is when we realize the kind of appreciation we have for it just increases, right? And of course, then this is the aspect of the scale and proportion that gives us a factual check to understand and comprehend the entire thing, right? So this is something what we say about when you have a closer look at something, you really get to understand the detail of the things and everything. However, then we know there was Mies who had this idea about God is in the detail, and he stressed upon the importance of giving enough resolution to the details to do something that you'd need to do in design and then do it thoroughly, and that is what in our context as architects and designers, Mies has always tried to teach us, that God is in the detail. And this can also be understood by this example that we share over here. This is a sculpture made by an artist, Salavat Fidai. It's a Russian-based artist. And when you look at the elephant on the ball, it's beautiful, right? But the appreciation again multiplies, when we understand that it's actually the tip of a pencil lead. And one further appreciates it more when we understand the actual scale and proportions. So when by the time we comprehend the intricacies that is involved in this, right, our joy, our respect for this particular piece kind of multiplies. Okay, so this is what this just a difference of what we talk about, God lies in the details and the devil lies in the details, is to be identified or not in this case, right? So now there's a book by Brent Brolin, which talks about architectural preferences and aesthetic preferences specifically. So when we talk about details, we can classify them into technical details and aesthetic details, right? So of course, one needs to be very mindful of what are the technical details and work around it. And but it is the aesthetic details which is visible, and that defines the experience in the end. So as this in the analogy of the furniture design that you see over here, there are many ways to join two members together, but it is what determines or defines the furniture piece detail is what the architect or the designer choose to show, right? So again, that is where the aesthetic details becomes very, very important. So primarily what I am trying to tell about or talk about today is all about the aesthetic details that one needs to develop in the design process, right? So coming back to that book that I was talking about, it's called The Designer's Eye. It's by Brent Brolin. And in the book, he does this comparative visual studies, which basically tells us why the building is looking the way that it is looking and what makes the differences in the appearance of the buildings. right? So if the form of a building had to follow the function, then why is it that all the office buildings don't look the same? Why is it that all the houses don't look the same? Why is it that all the schools don't look the same, right? So it is primarily these aesthetic preferences that the architects have that makes the building look different from each other, even if they both are an office building or a school or a house, right? So this entire process of developing the aesthetic preferences, right, and how we approach the design solution. So the entire problem solving in architectural design is more based on these aesthetic preferences, because that is what defines the design choices that an architects make, right? So through the progression of details at different scales, that is how we experience the building, especially like you can see over here in the corner of the edge of the building. So the right side of the picture is actually what it is built like. And what Brent Brolin has done is made a altered image of the same building on the left side, which primarily tells us to just do a visual study of understanding how much the detail matters and how much the impact of that detail is in that, right? So it is, one can say that it is the aesthetic preferences, it's the prime determinant of appearance rather than the function or any ideological rationalization, right? But at the same time, one should be very, very mindful about the fact that architecture and design is not about looking at, but rather something that offers an experience involving all senses, right? So this is just a small kind of a backdrop understanding of what I'm going to get into while talking about our projects, right? And I hope it just sets up a context for us in what context we are talking about these projects that I'm going to share. So my practice is under the name of Reasoning Instincts Architecture Studio. We've been practicing since 2014 now, and prior to that I was based in Singapore for 7 years, where I did my masters, I did some jobs, as well as I was a full-time lecturer at Singapore Polytechnic from 2010 to 2011 to 2014. So since 2014 we have come back and we've been practicing by ourselves. And what I'm going to share with you guys today in this subsequent slides is it's going to be more on the details that we think as designers have been very pivotal in the way they have helped us in the making of the space, rather than talking about the overall larger conceptual ideas or anything, right? So there are going to be 5 different projects. It's a mix. The details are going to be a mix of interior design details as well as certain architectural details. So once I finished 2 of my projects sharing with you, probably I'll look into some of the questions that you have and I'll try to answer them. Then we will look into another 2 projects, and then at the end we'll look at one of the last projects that we have, right? So the first one is it's a small retail store. We call it the pod store, right? And the whole brief and the idea was to break away from the notion of a conventional dry food store and design something that is more relevant to the current times and to the current shopping trends that one observes around us, right? So the whole idea was conceptualized based on this notion of pods. So these are these individual self-sufficient pods that becomes the display shelves, and then the circular form kind of also allows to have a free movement in between the pods that one looks forward to, right? And then the idea was to suspend them and bring it, not let that display shelves touch the ground, so that your depth of the shop is felt more, especially when you have such a compact shop. This is only a 900 square feet carpet area that we are talking about. So when you have such a compact thing and you still have to make the experience look more grandeur, we thought about having a continuous floor, unobstructed floor, so that one can read the depth, especially from the entrance, right? From the shop front. So one can see the depth of the shop more in terms of the size and everything. And also we were very conscious about not revealing the entire shop from the shop front. So the shop front is kind of more, not completely transparent, but rather the idea of having a framed view of what is happening inside, and then try to create some sense of curiosity in that, right? So the biggest challenge then was, how do we make this box, right? And of course, like every other project, this project also had the challenging of budget constraints. So this is something that would be done, is kind of adapted something that was actually available and then transform it into a display shelf. So these are aluminum thalis, the utensils that was available in the old city of Ahmedabad, and we got them, and we thought, and we stacked them suspended from the ceiling with the help of this MS pipe that becomes the core structure, and then that eventually becomes this leveled or tiered display shelf. So this aluminum thalis were quite light comparatively in their weight, but had this good strength to hold up the packets and everything, whatever we're going to display over there. Right? So the biggest thali, the biggest one at the bottom, is about 4 feet wide. The diameter is 4 feet, and the smallest one on the top, the dia we are talking about, is around 2.5 feet, right? So that is how they vary. So it becomes kind of a tapering thing that going up, right? We also got the aluminum dabbas, right? The boxes, and then used, these are readily available, and then used them as on the testing wall, where one could go and try it out, exotic dry fruit or something in that one, right? So this is something like an adaptive detail where you take forward something that is available and transform it into a different thing, right? So eventually you can see how the overall impact has been. So these are the what you see over here is where the dry fruits have been placed for one to try it out, taste it. And then this is something, a branding element that we have made over here, right? I'll come back to that into the next slide or so. But what I want to highlight over here is, this is the way the entire different thalis have been stacked up together, and they form one pod, right? Above from the ground completely. Small details like highlighting the central axis of each and every pod by just changing the tile size or changing the grouting color, it impacts a lot in the overall experience. Right? I'm just going to go through some of the pictures of this particular project. So we had a square column in the center of the shop, because and then we thought of making it more of a circular and trying to bring up the same language over here that we have for the circular pods, and also that kind of makes it a lot more continuity, and we don't see the column as an obstruction in the space. So this is what I was talking about, the branding element that you can see over here, right? So the dabbas, whatever dry fruits, exotic dry fruits you have tried, you can actually follow the pipes and then come to over here, and this is where what you see is the origin of that particular dry fruit, whether it comes from Peru, Afghanistan, or Russia, or whatever it is, right? So we want to kind of create a certain sense of memories for people visiting to this store, especially when we understand that the dry fruit store, generally it is the grandfather or the grandmother in the family who goes for the dry fruit shopping, and not the younger generation. And when we talk about grandparents, the grandkids are always with them. So these are the thoughts which made us detail out certain things the way it is right now, right? And there were two variations in one of the pots based on the kind of items that one had to display on that. Right? So that is what it looks like. This is just another view of that. And one of the key other aspect that played important role in the overall character was the use of infographics. So wherever you see the infographics over here, that is placed on top of the storage shelves over there. So these infographics also played quite a significant role in expressing this idea of something that needs to be more relevant to the current times or more relevant to the current shopping trends. Right? And at times it is about thinking differently about small things rather than waiting for that big idea to come in your mind. And if you can think about the smaller things more radically, maybe there is something to look into it. Like for example, we have this suspended jars over here filled up with dry fruits. And in this case, if you really want to open the jar, you have to rotate the bottle and the cap remains still. But this is again something we wanted to continue in the overall concept of how we thought about the pots being suspended. So the jars also is being there as a suspended jars, right? I'm going to move on to my next project, and after this one, I'll take some questions, and then we take it forward from there, right? So the next project that I'm going to share with you all is about it's about an office space, what we call as a fabric gallery. It's about 5,000 square feet of carpet area, and the brief was about to have a workspace which has a fabric gallery in it. So the clients are basically into manufacturing of upholstery and curtain fabrics. So we conceived the whole idea and interpreted the idea of having a workspace within a fabric gallery rather than having a fabric gallery within a workspace. And that made us very conscious about the fact that we need to constantly be making the user be interactive with the fabric in that case. And so the fabric came out of the gallery area and also tried to utilize the same fabrics in the other parts of the office, even if it is not a display gallery, right? And one of the prime or one of the key elements that was developed was the screen at the reception, which we made it using the same, using their own products, their own fabrics, right? And it becomes important because that's the first encounter, especially when you enter the office space, and it kind of screens away the service passage behind it, right? So when we started detailing this particular screen, there was a lot of ideas in terms of and challenges that we were looking into, that how do we make sure that it stands, and how do we create this mosaic of fabrics. And there was another challenge that we set up ourselves was we should be able to change this fabric. Anyone should be able to change this fabric very easily. So if they have a new set of fabrics, a new designs of fabrics, they can change it, and that would entirely change the feel of the experience of that reception area. So the solution for us lied into the idea of the concentric rings that we often see our grandmother and mother using to do the embroidery in a fabric. So we took forward that idea and we tried to design each module in such a way that one could easily remove the concentric rings and easily change the fabric when and as it is required. Right? So it is a key element in the entire office space, and so it as you can see in the pictures, that this is what the service passage is, and that's in the front is the reception area over here. Right? So it creates a nice backdrop as well for the waiting lobby. Right? I'm just going to go through some other pictures of this project. So we had to customize, design all the workstations, the storage units, and the display units, and everything. Right? There was a challenge of having a very low headrooms. So we've tried to negate that by concentrating the service only on top of the table so that we have more heights, more headrooms in the alleyways and other key spaces. So here again, there's an aluminum expanded metal mesh that we have used here on the top, which is housing all the services, right? And it is right above only on the tables. So you have clear heights on the alleyways and other spaces. Designing of other tables. So all of these tables were customizedly designed, except for the chairs, which were catalog picked. And this whole notion of that a solid top with a very light base to it. So if you see the other tables also, it kind of reflects the same thing. So you're trying to create a design language that one can observe over here. And at the same time, there are a lot of different kind of materials that are used, from pine wood to teak wood to MS, that kind of juxtaposed on each other to create a sense of design language in the entire space. And, you know, I mean, since it was a large space, a 5,000 square feet carpet, there were possibilities for us to create a certain different kind of experience in certain specific spaces. And as designers, we should not shy away from getting rid of things. Just like an editor, we should learn what needs to be added and what needs to be removed when, right? So it is okay, you know, to have simple things, simple compositions and everything, right? So this was a concrete table that we had made for the CEO, just a small, right? So yeah, and I think before I go on to any further onto the other projects, I'll just try to see if I have some questions. Let me see. Just share. Okay. I have okay, I have some questions by Dibya here, but I think I will request her to be a little bit more specific, because what you have just written over here are some words which what kind of materials for what? Can you be a little bit more specific on that, so I can give you appropriate response to that? All right, I have one more question right now over here from Manika. How do we get such good finishes in concrete furniture? Technique, please. I think the technique is the conventional one. It is only the idea of doing it right. It also involves in terms of the mixing of concrete that you get it right. And it also to use the right tools, what you're supposed to do, and not use the makeshift tools to make or cast any concrete things, right? So the shuttering is very important. One needs to be very sure about that, and then you choose the materials of your shuttering accordingly, right? So from all levels, I guess it really matters onto that to do the things the way they are supposed to be done, and not adapt to any makeshift methods, and then probably one can achieve what you want to do in the concrete finishes, especially on furniture. At sometimes we also use microtipping. Microtipping is a new technology where you can have a concrete finish by just doing a 2 mm applications of a concrete polymer layer on it. So you can look into that. Microtipping is a new material that one could explore in use of furniture. Right then, do I have any more? Showcase. Mani Chaurasia is asking a very specific question. In that table in the previous example, did you add that area of supporting triangle vertex on the flow? Same as the thickness generally is for the normal table. Of course, I mean, the triangular, there were two aspects on that. There was a table for a designer. So we needed a space to keep the drawing rolls and everything. So the triangular was thought about in that way so that it forms the wedge and then you have the space to keep some bags and drawing tables and everything. And it certainly goes to the floor. And however, it has not been anchored to the floor. It has just been resting on the floor, right? So, and there is technically there is another member that you don't see in this table that is going in between the two sandwiched layers of the teak wood that you see over there, right? Okay, there's one question, one more from Manika, which is asking, in the first project, what finishes have been used on the pods, please? Okay, so the aluminum thalis that you saw, what we did was we then applied paint over it, and it is a metallic paint, and we chose the color of rose gold in that one. So it is in rose gold metallic paint finish on the pods. Okay. Right then, okay. Let's move on. I'll come back to the questions again, as in once we have discussed a couple of more projects that I want to show with you all. Right. So let me go and share the screen. Okay, so are we able to see back my screen? I hope everyone is able to see back the screen, and we can continue on the projects, right? So why am I not able to? Okay. So the next project that I'm going to discuss with you or share with you guys is called the Garment Studio. It's relatively a very small workspace which had two parts to it. One was the back of the office, kind of a behind the scenes kind of a thing where you do the stitching and you do the cutting and you do the ironing of the fabric and the garments and everything. And there was one part where you showcase it to the clients and you entertain the visitors and the clients over there. So what we're going to see over here is the second part of it, wherein you actually try to host the guests and do your display of the garments and everything. So these guys are into wholesale business of ladies' garments and like Indian dresses, salwar kameez and things like that. So they make it, they get the raw fabric, they make it, they get the embroidery done and everything, and then they finally display it over here. And the retailer guys will come here and they buy it from there, and then they will put it in their retail shops and things like that, right? So there was a lot of interesting ideas that we were playing around here with, and the nature of the functions of the spaces were such that it resulted into having such strict compartments kind of organization that each space had their own kind of requirements and everything. So what we thought about was to celebrate the common area more, where they all comes together, and especially celebrate a little and enhance or express the interface between each space and the common area. So when we talk about the interface, it is primarily what we talk about is the door that leads you to the other space, right? So the door here, as you can see in this picture, it's a composition of many things coming together, right? And if we look into the details of it, we see over here is that it is a kind of a combination, a composite thing where you're using different kinds of glass surfaces, whether it is fluted glass, patterned glass, the scribbled glass, plain glass, along with brass plates, right? So we identify the materials, then we identify the different glass typologies that you want to use, and then we come up with one module, two module, kind of 3 to 4 different modules that kind of gets repeated, and then we compose them in a certain composition to achieve the overall look of the door. So it's become very important to deliberately layer your details, and then try to be more thorough with your specifications. Try to specify as much as you can, as much particulars you can, to best suit your overall vision. So that is something that we try to do in this one as well, to specify to the smallest of the details, right? And we also specified here to what kind of joint they have to use. So the glass over here is joined by something called as a glass weld. So it's a joinery that is nowadays done by very few people. And so we were lucky enough to find this particular vendor an artist rather, I would say, a craftsman who can do this kind of joints for the specified thing that we have given. So the two glass are welded together. So there's a whole technique of glass welding. So this welded glasses are pulled by the MS frames, and then this smaller MS frames get connected to the larger MS frames, and that's how the entire door is then kind of made. So there you can see how the doors are kind of interacting with the other design elements in the common areas. So we have this inlay of brass right at the entrance, and then it takes you, and if you follow them, it will take you in one of the spaces, and then it continues back up into the vertical walls, and then terminates into a small motif over there, right? So it's kind of this brass plates also that you see over here, used as highlighters, that kind of complements the smaller brass plates that you've used in the glass doors. So one try to create certain sense of design language that you want to follow or you want to create, right? And what works or what makes this particular composition a little bit more expressive is the aesthetic qualities of each of these materials. They're quite different, they're contrasting, but it is this contrast, it is this difference that is kind of enhancing their innate properties, and then one needs to start understanding and learn to appreciate these differences, right? So again, this is what you see over here. This is the brass strip that has been inlaid into this panel, and this panel is made out of MDF. It's a colored MDF, so you don't have to do a coat of color on top of it. You do get different colored MDFs nowadays. So this is the blue colored one, right? And then you also enhanced it a little bit more with the motifs that one uses in the embroidery and everything, and that is etched over an acrylic plate, which then becomes a layer on top of the blue MDF, which also has the brass strip highlighting over there, right? So this is hammered brass plate that you see over here, along with the blue MDF. Again, two contrasting thing, but again, it's the contrasting thing itself that is making it so expressive, right? The next project that I'm going to talk about is it's a house. It's a very large house. It's a 7-bedroom house, you can say that, right? And we did the architecture as well as the interiors for the house. And what I'm going to specifically focus around is this space, which is the heart of the house, which is the family space, right? And though the whole house is spread across the 3 floors, we're just going to talk about certain elements that we have designed in here. And that is the scale of the house that you can see sitting across in middle of the dense housing and the other private bungalows around it, right? So this is the cube house, and this is the space that we're going to talk about a little bit more. This is a double volume. So the living room is a double volume space, has a very large window, double volume, to bring in the north light and the screen that you see behind it. That is something that we believe has really helped us to enhance the spatial quality of this entire space, right? So again, one you conceptualize it, and then you understand how it's going to work, how things are going to come together. So in this case, it's a very simple detail. It's not at all motorized. People often ask me this, oh, this is motorized, do I have to, whereas the electrical connections and everything, but this is not it is not mechanized. It's a very simple manual thing to be done, and it is based on two hollow MS pipes uh, uh, with two different diameters. So the larger one just rotates on top of the smaller one. So the smaller one is fixed to the frame, and the larger one is fixed to the plank, the timber plank, and that what makes the plank rotate, right? And then you also want to add into and develop it into with certain sense of variations into it. So one changes the size of the plank at certain places, and then to further add to that complexities, one wants to give variations with colors. And in the colors, we were quite so there. The idea was to have something which can have a very subtle presence, but at the same time helps you identify the variations. So we tried with different colors first, but they were looking too pastel, too solid, and then eventually we sat down with the painter and it's like, can we kind of reduce the opacity of it, and then can we make it a little transparent so that the teak veneer has a nice polish, and then you have like a very nice transparent thin layer of color on top of it. And we made we made a mock-up in terms of understanding the framing also, and that mock-up really helped us. And eventually what we could achieve is what you see here on the screen, right? So that's the screen that we were talking about, and you can see now how the colors, the blue and the yellows is there, but it is not so loud, right? So that is something you can say was an aesthetic preference from us as a designers, that we didn't want to have that loud and we want to keep it subtle, but at the same time one can identify the variations and everything, right? So from the other side, where it kind of wheels or screens the staircase, it is an interesting interactive screen where while going up and down, you have this sense of joy while rotating the planks that you can do. And that not only just gives that, but also filters the light in a very different way across the staircase on this side. So we have met the clients. It's been more than 1.5 years they're living in the house, and they mentioned that they have small kids. Though there is a presence of lift, they don't want to use the lift because they don't want to miss the flipping or the rotating of these screen elements over there, right? So it kind of becomes a great backdrop as well, and especially the height that it has helps us to accentuate the double volume that the living space is in. Right? And the fact that when you look at it at a more closer way, you actually realize the potential it holds to generate certain sense of emotions, and when you look at it from a different angle or different distances, we start understanding certain intricacies, certain furthermore details that is involved in it. So this is just a different view from a different perspective of the screen, right? And so we did our own checks in terms of what happens if we would have not done the screen the way we did. So inspired by Brent Brolin's book, we also tried to do our own checks, and I'm just wondering if we had done a plain white wall instead of doing the screen, what would have happened. And I think I'll leave this to your own interpretation by just observing these two visuals that you have, compare them, and probably you will get a little bit more better sense of what is the impact of such a detail on a space, you know. Right then, so let's move on. And we did the same thing with the window as well. We thought, what if we had not made a double height window over there? Of course, for us, what was more important was to make that tree part of this living room somehow, if we were told visually also. That's a large tree that you see over there was part of the adjacent plot, and also to bring maximum daylight through north. But yeah, even if I would have not done it, I don't know how. I mean, it is there for you to observe the difference between the two. That if the large window, the impact of that large double height window on the space, right? So I think what I'll do is now I'll try to go back to the Q&A, and I'll see if I can answer some of the questions over there, because after this I'll, let me see. Okay, there's a question by Anant Agrawal asking, in the pot store, the thalis were movable or remained stiff? Anand, it was stiff. They were not rotating. It was a static thing. So it was a static composition. Once it's there, it's there. You don't move it. Neither it was swinging as well, right? So that is there. Okay. I think again, I'll request Divya to be more specific in her questions. Which project are you talking about? Because you're asking what kind of flooring you use in this project. This project meaning what project? I'm just highlighting this because I want everyone else to also be more specific in your questions if you have any, right? And do you have any more? An anonymous attendee is asking this. Anyways, that table the previous. Okay, I think I'll move on further. Okay, there's a question by Bhagya Lakshmi over here. She's asking about how do you convince clients when it comes to experimentations? I think you can convince the clients if you convince yourself. If you are fearless about doing experimentation, then it is more, and you are convinced about the idea that it will work, then it will be more easier for convincing the clients. And the moment you have a doubt, no matter how much you try, you will not be able to convince the clients. So it's more important that you get convinced first yourself, that and believe in that idea that you want to take it further, right? Then in the pot store, okay, this is a question by Anisha Sawant. In the pot store, the pots were hanging. Ceiling can hold the load of pots as time passes? Of course, it can. Please understand, we are not talking the slabs that we cast, the ceilings that we do. They do consider live loads and dead loads when the structure engineer is designing the structure. And actually, the loading is not that much. The aluminum thalis are quite light, and aluminum is a light material. And the packages that you see on top of it, they're ranging from 250 grams to 500 grams because they are dry fruits, you know. So they were not that heavy actually. So it does not, that was not an issue. That was very easy to deal with, you know. There's a question by Vishalakshi, right? I'm sorry if I pronounced it wrong. You're saying, can you suggest in using the duplicate material for wood, as I notice more utilization of it in cube house? Please note that there is no duplicate material to wood. Whatever you see over there is pure teak wood. However, one of the things that you can see that the staircase is cladded with is not been made by, it is a finger joint wood. It is a recycled wood. So you have solid blocks of wood that you connect together in a certain way, and then you make a sheet out of it, just like ply. That is 8 by 4. So you get an 8 feet by 4 feet size of ply, and then you get this 8 feet by 4 feet kind of finger joint wood. So it is a pure wood. It is not a duplicate material. It's the fact that it is made differently. It is available in market in a different form than the traditional conventional idea and notion of wood that we have, right? Okay, Monica is asking one question, which I think is quite valid, and I should answer that. Is that in the garment store, the doors with MS frames and different types of glasses, what's the thickness of the door? Is it too heavy to access? Well, the door itself was heavy. Yes, it was. The thickness is around 1.5 inches, right? That was the size of the frame of my, that is what we talk about, 40 mm. Right, it's the size of my L angle that we have used to frame the glasses. So the composition and the modules of the glass was quite heavy. So, but nowadays you have good hardwares to take care of heaviness of the doors. So in actually operating the doors, you don't feel that heaviness so much. But if I had to lift the door without that hardware, yes, it's quite heavy. It was very heavy. There's one more question by Mani Chaurasia over here. In the garment store, can you tell how was the design formed on the floor while constructing it or while tiling? Of course, it was while we were laying the stones, right? So there's a whole defined process of what we call as inlay. When you want to do inlay but be mindful, inlay can only be more successful in natural stones compared to tile works. So in the garment store, garment studio, what you see is actually a black kadappa stone, a natural polished stone. So inlay works can be done while you are doing these stone works over there, and then it gets polished along with the stone, right? All right, let's move forward. I'm just going to take this series of slides further down, and then we can always come back to the questions later on, right? So this is the last project that I'm going to share with you guys, and this is it's a big house. It's a weekend house that we have designed. So what I'm going to talk in this one is more of architectural details than compared to what we saw earlier about interior details, right? And it's called the Portal House, and so it's spread across a large land of 2 acres. And what you see over here is bedrooms. So we have 4 bedrooms in different corners, having their own privacies, right? And the central part is where you have the common areas, the living and the dining and the sports area and everything, right? So what I'm going to focus and discuss with you guys on right now is the notion, it's the detail of this extending walls that you see. These are these landscape non-structural walls that helps us define the architectural language of the entire house. And then I'm going to talk about the flooring, the ramp, the texture of the ramp. It becomes very important and pivotal for us because it's a house without any formal doors. You don't have a door that particularly defines that now you are inside or now you are outside, right? So this is the ramp from the parking outside that leads you into the house, and it is a quite long, 70 meters long ramp, and it's like a transitional phase that when you are coming into the house from the outside world, you go forward and you go into a transition phase where, okay, now you realize the sense of arrival that I'm here now. I don't have to worry about the outside and just enjoy whatever I get within the house, right? So that was again the first encounter for a user. So that was important. And the third one, the detail that we're going to talk about is about the cotton steel portals. So these are portals made out of cotton steel, and they are there for a purpose. They are there for both aesthetic as well as functional purpose, right? And this is just an aerial view of the house. Of course, there's a very old picture taken 3 years back. Today, if you look at it, I'm sure the landscape has matured much more than what you see right now over here on the screen, right? And so talking about the ramp, right? So again, there could have been many solutions to the kind of flooring layer pattern that we have created onto the ramp from the entrance till the house. And so the idea behind this was that we wanted something to enhance the perspective more, make it look more longer. Even if you had to walk only 70 meters, probably you could feel that I have to go for 100 meters, right, before I could enter the house or actually reach to the outdoor room over there, right? So this is so what we thought of doing it. First thing was to have continuous joints in that longer directions and break joints in the shorter directions. Now that is one design decision or design choice that you've made, and then to further accentuate it, we made it into smaller. We changed the width, so we have a narrower width, and then you have a broader width, and then you have even a broader width. So that what made is that increases the number of lines, the joints that you see, and that number of lines increased kind of enhances the perspective further, and then makes it more look longer and longer and longer, right? So this is just a nice view of how it kind of gives a different kind of texture on the floor, and how that interacts with the built masses, right? So that also matters, and that is a very critical and significant detail in terms of the experience, in terms of how one travels from one point to the other point, you know. So that becomes very important. And of course, we checked it again. I mean, would have been really made any difference if we did it differently. And we tried to see that. So on the right, what you see is the actual image, and on the left is an altered image to see what difference it would have made in the overall feel and experience of this ramp or space, right? So this is there. And moving on, talking about the cotton steel panels or the cotton steel portals, right? So right from the idea of conceptualizing it, the idea of how the perforations will be made, you know, what material and everything. So conceptually, the idea was to have a contrasting material to the existing trees. So on the side, there were a lot of existing trees and a lot of canopies that we observed, and we saw filtered light coming through it and everything. So this is an actual picture of a tree on the side, which we took lying down on the ground, looking up towards the sky. And so that is the picture that we have. And then we brought in our softwares, we pixelated it. And from that, what we determined was whatever sky we see, we make it a void. And whatever leaves we see, we make it a solid, right? So based on that, our entire a drawing was prepared and was shared with the vendors to make a mock-up that you see over here. It's a mock-up. And then, of course, the mock-up that you see over here has a grid line of dimension of 8.75 mm by 8.75 mm. However, eventually what was built on site was a grid size of 13.125 mm by 13.125. I don't know if you are able to guess why it is so. Of course, if I talk about aesthetic preference, I would have gone with the 8.75. But at the same time, we have the budget constraints. And so the laser cutting machine or the water jet cutting machine works or charges on the time that it takes to do a panel, right? So the more smaller the grid, the more time it takes in one panel, right? So eventually value engineering it, we decided to go with 13.125 grid because that seems to be a little bit more economically viable option to do, right? So this idea of very filigree canopy, very soft versus that this very crisp and very metal kind thing, which kind of contrasting each other. Again, the idea of accentuating the innate properties by two contrasting things, And then there was the question of pre-weathering it. And so cotton steel is a living material, and it is, when you start, it is just like MS mild steel, black in color. But then you start pre-weathering it, it goes down to this bright orange color when it gets oxidized, and the rust itself is the protecting layer of this. And then after that, the idea was about how do we install this? What is the composition? What's the position of each panel? What is the orientation of each panel that you want to create to come together so that you can create a space within it? So you can see here in the extreme right picture, the light filtering through is just like the canopies that we experience in the canopies on the site, right? And it's just that the crispness of the metal and the softness of the trees over there. So it kind of light filters it, the shadow patterns that it creates, right? So this one is a roof on the top that kind of makes a shelter in the terrace. And this is right in front of each and every room, what we call as the cabanas. And it not only creates a nice sitting area behind this as a veranda, but it houses the services on the top. So you don't see the air conditioning unit, the geysers and everything over there. So again, once I was questioned, what difference would have it made if I would have not made this portal? The house would still have a shelter. The house would still have a rooms and everything, and it would have functioned perfectly fine. I said, maybe, yes, you're correct. It might be functionally fine, but there is something that the portals have contributed in the architecture language. And then again, so that we checked. So you can see for yourself what difference the presence makes versus what is there if it is not there, right? So these details matters. I mean, in the end of the day, this is what is going to define the language. This is what is going to define the experiences, right? And the last one that I'm going to talk about the element is the pigmented concrete walls that you see over here. Initially, we wanted to do a rammed earth walls. Unfortunately, the soil that from the site did not have that much of strength to be constructed into a rammed earth wall. So we decided to make a pigmented concrete wall. Of course, and at the same time, these are non-structural walls. So it does not make sense to make such thick concrete walls when it is especially non-structural, right? So what we did was we made an infill brick wall and just the 50 mm of rendering on both the sides of pigmented concrete. So one goes into the detail and specifies the shutter design also. We told him what wood to be taken, right? And then you make planks of 3 inches, 4 inches, 2 inches, and then repeat that module. 3 inches, 4 inches, 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches, 2 inches, right? You mix the pigment while you are mixing the concrete, and then you pour the concrete. And this is what in the end we got. So of course, before we got into this, we also did mock-ups, and to get the right saturation of the pigment. You know, we didn't want it to get too dark, we didn't want to get too light. So whatever, then again, what decides the saturation, then again it boils down to the designer's aesthetic preferences that has developed over the period of times, right? So we did this mock-up, and eventually what we have now is this. This is a picture very recently, I think a 6 months or 4 months back picture, and it's been 4 years that we have done this house. And again, detailing depends on the viewing distance, how closely you are interacting with the element. We saw that in the screen picture in the cube house, in even this one. So whether it's an interior element or it's an exterior one, the distance, the viewing distance, the interaction between the user and that element matters a lot, and that also depends. I mean, that also kind of contributes toward the overall experience, right? So you want to create richness. It can be created through informed simplicity, how simply things interact to each other. I mean, or it's not always through lot of agglomerations of things. Over here, you can see the wall and the cotton steel portal are interacting, but they're not. There's a gap between a void between the two, but yet they both are complementing and interacting with in a way that they only know how they're doing in that case. So again, I leave this to your interpretation. This image speaks volumes to us when we look at it, right? And yeah, so I started with what we remembering needs about God is in the detail, and I'll go towards the conclusion by remembering Charles Eames, who says the details are not the details, but it is the details that makes the design, right? So yeah, be fearful, draw those 20 sketches that you have to, and fear less about your failures. Be fearless about your failures. It's okay to fail at times, and draw those 20 sketches, right? Increase your visual vocabulary, nurture your aesthetic preferences, and these all things you will be only able to do if you start observing things around you. You look at them with more sensitivity, you look at them at more from a different perspective, right? So that is going to help you to develop those preferences for yourself, and which eventually will help you to become a better designer, I guess, because you will take much more informed decisions, right? So at the same time, be aware of the consequences of your design choices, right? So I'm going to leave you with just a small quote from Brent Brolin from his book, The Designer's Eye, is that being aware of your visual intentions and their consequences can both clarify and enrich the search for design solutions, right? So last but the least, what I would like to tell you guys is to pay attention to details, right? Do pay attention to your details. Sometimes we tend to get carried away and we think about details as the supporting role to our overall big idea, but I think they are the central thing that communicates your idea and with which a user will interact more, right? They might not understand, because a user for user, it is not the philosophical connect they'll do, but what they see, they react to that, they respond to that, to what they see, and details is what is going to express that, right? So if you have, you can email me if you have any queries or anything. My email ID is just right there. That's our website address over there, and I have the Instagram handle over there mentioned as well. So you can get in touch with me if you have any queries, you want to know anything about anything that we have shared right now or beyond that also. So thanks, and what I'm going to do is now I'm going to go to the Q&As again, and I see if I can answer some of the questions that we have, right? And So there's a question by Jaspreet Kaur. Is asking, in the 7-bedroom house, what type of windows are those? Do they open fully like doors or just the half? In the living room, yes, it's a combination of both. There are certain windows which just open half as a uh, top hinged one, and there are 2 shutters specifically that opens up completely to access the small intimate courtyard over there. Okay. Good presentations. There's a question here by Bhakti. Bhakti who's asking, I wanted to ask you a question in general about all the projects, about how do you go about with the design process altogether. Actually, the fact is that there is no defined design process for every project. In terms of when you, especially for conceptualizing it, there should be a very defined design process to document it, and to execute the job. You must go through all the stages of the design and should not skip any of them. But to conceptualize, to think about an idea, there is no prescribed way to do it. And sometimes there are different things from the site or from the client's interaction, that we pick something and we could relate to that, and then based on that a certain concepts are developed, and then you question those concepts with rationalities and everything, and try to identify the most suitable one in all aspects, from sustainability aspects, from economically aspects, and then eventually decide which direction you want to go forward, right? There's a question again by Bhagyalakshmi here. So much of thought process goes in conceptualizing an idea. So in case of renovations, how to take it forward? Actually, to be honest, if it is a renovation and if the client is asking you only to do it, it's a little strange. So there, I mean, either then in that case, we have not, the client is not, I mean, renovation can happen for various reasons, that you don't want to look at this and you want to do something different, or something has gone bad and then again we have to renovate. But it's just a process. It's very subjective at the same time, renovations. We need to know the reason for the renovation, first of all. What is the reason why renovation is required, and then accordingly act to that. So, and if it goes to the other architect or other designers, then it is the burden is transferred to the other architect of what to do and what not to do. Okay. Yeah, I mean, if you guys have any further questions or anything related to what we have spoke today, you can email me as well. And I thank once again the Vogue Institute of Art and Design to organize this and giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts with you. Shruti, I do see there.
Thank you, Ujjwal. Can we conclude now?
Yes, I think I'm good. If I don't see any more questions coming in right now, so
Yeah.
And I'm just, my email ID is there. They can contact us on the website or this email if they have anything they want to ask, any specific questions later on also. And I think I've already shared the copy of this presentation with you.
Yeah.
So if your students need it for their reference again, feel free to share with them. That should be okay.
Yeah.
Right?
So I want to conclude with the core value hearts. that in a successful organization, no detail is too small to escape close attention. So that you made everyone to realize and shown with your wonderful projects. So thank you very much for the wonderful webinar, Ujjaval. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ujjwal, from my side, from Vogue and all attendees and my team. Okay, and especially thanks to my team to make it, successful, this webinar. Very okay. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Shruti. Thanks for organizing things. Thank you.